Emily, and I'm just popping on here to do a quick intro for a video I've been meaning to film for a while about how I knit. Now, this is not going to be a how-to knit video, though if you want one of those from me, let me know and I'll be happy to do it, but this is a how I knit. One of the things I find really interesting about knitting is there's so many different ways in how you hold the yarn and how you manipulate the yarn and how you hold the needles and all this stuff. So many different ways to get the same outcome. And so I always find it really interesting to see what people's personal knitting styles are. Sometimes I pick up tips that make my knitting easier, and sometimes it's just really interesting. Sometimes I look at it and go, wow, that would probably drive me nuts, but I'm glad you like it. So that's what this video is going to be about. Before I jump to showing you my hands and my knitting, I'll just mention that I am a self-taught knitter. Before YouTube tutorials were a thing, I taught myself to knit out of this book. If you like looking at diagrams and following diagrams and written instructions, I definitely recommend this book. It's the Reader's Digest Complete Guide to Needlework. It includes embroidery, needlepoint, knitting, applique, quilting, patchwork, macrame, crochet, rug making, and lacework. It has nicely done drawn illustrations, if that's something you do. I would recommend getting one of the older versions. I know that several of the Reader's Digest complete guides have been updated, and the more up-to-date ones actually have less information in them. They've been kind of dumbed down, I think. This one was printed in 1979, and I think I found it for like $2 at Goodwill's book section. So yeah, if you're interested in learning to knit off of a diagram, if that's the style that works for you, go with this one. One thing I do like about this one is it definitely emphasizes that both continental and English holding, so whether you hold the yarn in your left hand with continental or your right hand with English, are both valid, and to test and see which one works better for you. So I tried both of them when I was learning, and I determined that continental works better for me. It doesn't address things like the stitch mount, whether you're doing the twisted, I think it's sometimes called Eastern versus the standard Western stitch mount. It doesn't address things like knitting backwards, where instead of going with, so normally most of the time when you knit, you've got your not yet knit stitches in your left hand and your knit stitches in your right hand, and some people do that backwards. So there's a bunch of different things that it doesn't fully address, but just for general basic, will get you through pretty much all the patterns, because all the patterns are written for this kind of basic style. I do like this book. So that's how I taught myself. That was a relatively long intro before I show you what I do. Alright, I'm basically sitting with my tripod in my lap, so I'm going to try not to bump anything and to keep my hands extended so that you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to do this demonstration on my Casual Friday cardigan that I'm working on. If you keep up with my other videos, you will have seen this last week in my knitting update. I haven't made any progress since then, so we'll at least have the couple rows that I do in this demo. I've gotten past the seed stitch, so I can start showing you on the straight stockinette. Unfortunately, I'm in the middle of shaping on both ends, so there may be a little pause when I turn and figure out whether or not I need to do an increase. But we'll just deal with that when we come to it. Maybe I'll edit it out. We'll see. So, first of all, I knit continental with a standard Western stitch mount, nothing terribly exciting. When I hold my yarn, I run it back and forth through my fingers, like this. I've tried the whole looping it around a finger thing, but I find that that's way too tight for me. So unless the yarn is really slippery, I just wind it back and forth, and I kind of curl my hand like this as I hold on to the needle. And that keeps my yarn at a nice tension, and I've got this finger where I can manipulate the yarn fairly well. I just kind of hold this like so as well. And then, just in case you're curious, these are some ChowGoo interchangeables. I believe they're a size 6 or 4 millimeters. I do like sharp tips. So when I knit, I just go in and I kind of do both a scoop and a move. I kind of bring my finger and my needle together to bring the yarn around. Man, it is really hard. I'm trying to describe this while looking at the viewfinder, and that is just not easy. So I put my thing in, I kind of bring my yarn around, slide it off. I am working a little ways away from the tip, and I tend to do that. Not like super far back, but far enough back that this is around the fullest part of the needle when I get done, so I don't have my stitches too tight. I'll run this up here, and then I'm actually a little bit faster than this when I'm not holding my hands at a funky angle. But I'll push all this up and then just kind of by feel go into the edge of this stitch. I tend to keep my hands really near the tips of the needles, which I'm realizing makes it harder for you to see what I'm doing. And then I think I need to increase here. Yeah, I need to increase here. So I'm just doing a make one increase. And so I'm just going to bring this tip of the needle under this thread. And then to stitch through a back loop, sometimes I'll just go straight in. If it's a regular stitch that's on my needle and I need to go into the back loop, I will. But if I've just picked up a loop like this, what I'll actually do is go in as if to purl and then flip the position of my two needles. So I just kind of roll this needle over the other one, and then I end up in a position to stitch through the back loop with less manipulation, less difficulty. Sometimes it's hard to get your needle in the back loop. And then on this one I just knit and then I'll purl. Now when I purl, I slide my needle in the front loop and I bring my finger down, and then I bring my finger back and I give a little tug. And the reason I do this is I used to have an issue with what's called rowing out, which is where the tension on your knits and your purl is not quite the same. And on the front of your fabric, you can see distinct rows where some of the stitches are larger than others. And what I discovered was my purl stitches were looser than my knit stitches, but if I just pull very gently on it, that takes up just enough of the thread that they're no longer different tensions. They're actually very, very similar. I don't have any issues with rowing out. So it's very easy to do when doing like a 1x1 rib or a seed stitch, which I'm going to show you in a minute. It's less easy when you're doing straight purling, but I find it's worthwhile. And so I just, I do this and then I very quickly give a little tug and then I bring my finger right back to the front. Oops. And it's just this very quick little whoop forward and then come back motion. And for me, that makes a huge difference in how even my knitting is. I will mention just that I knit fairly tight, and so tightening that up there is not, just brings it back into line with everything else. If you knit looser, you may need to do a different modification so that you don't tighten it too much. Now the next section that I have to do is seed stitch, which is knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, and I was going to show you how I switch back and forth. A lot of people demonstrate this in rib, but I happen to have seed stitch, and if I weren't, seed stitch is basically rib just offset every other round. So what I'll do is I'll knit one, and then I'll bring my yarn forward, slide my needle in. I kind of, to go into purl, I often put my needle behind and then like slide it up and in. Do my purl stitch, bring the yarn back and give that little tug. Do a knit stitch, come forward, purl stitch. And I don't tighten up after my knit stitches, it's only my purl stitches that need it. I picked that tip up actually from a Very Pink Knits video where she was talking about, I believe it was the last knit in your rib columns that looks too loose, and so she was talking about pulling the first purl a little tighter, but I learned that I can apply it to all of my purls and that solves all of my rowing out issues. So again, it's really hard for me to tell if you can see what I'm doing well, because if I look in the viewfinder, then I mess up. So, you know, go in and knit, come forward, purl, back. It just kind of slides right past that tip for me. And one thing I've noticed is that I'll pull my, I'm noticing this right now, is I'll pull my yarn forward by bringing this hand forward, and then angle the purl back, slide the needle in, and then do the purl stitch. And let me make sure I didn't mess up that seed stitch. Okay, it looks like I did not. Also, I realized I didn't mark off the round that I did that increase on earlier. And I think, okay, I don't need to do any increases here. So that is really how I knit. I'm just going to do at least one more row across. Let me double check. I think I need to do an increase here. And then mark that I did that increase. And then, let's see, we start with a knit. I'm going to try to do this at kind of full speed without bumping into the camera. Oops, I have a tangle in my yarn. Okay. Okay, tangle problem resolved. I have no idea how that happened. Now let's see. That's a knit stitch, so I need to purl it for my seed stitch. Just the edge of my circular needle is bumping against the drawer pull on my desk that I'm sitting in front of while I knit. So if you hear any little clunking, that's all that is. One thing that does help me keep up my speed is I push all of my stitches towards the tip of this needle, and then I'll kind of work them up as I go with my thumb. And then every so often when they either start getting too bunched up on here or there's not enough on here, I'll kind of pause and push more of this up and push this down. Let's see, and this time there's no increase here. As you may be able to tell, I prefer to use a pencil and paper and mark off my rows rather than any sort of app. I do use a row counter, like a clicky golf counter thing. I bought them on Amazon, a bunch of them. I like those if it's going to be consistent, but in this case, since I'm measuring two things, one of which has to be done every other right side row and one of which has to be done every right side row, it's better for me to just mark off on paper with a little dash saying that I've done it. And I'm noticing here, okay, this drives me a little bit nuts with Stroll. See how I got that smaller bit because this whole stitch didn't, that whole thread didn't get used? For whatever reason, the Stroll splits on me so much worse than other yarns. Let me get the offending strand. Sorry, pulling it out of sight. This whole thing should have gone through that stitch. Ooh, and I'm still missing one somehow. If I don't pay attention with the Stroll, I have issues with that where I don't with other sock yarns, so I'm not 100% thrilled with it. I bought a whole bunch at one point at a really good sale because I wanted to have it for solid colors for socks, but I don't think I'm going to keep with that. I prefer the Knit Picks Felici. It has a much better twist and it doesn't do that. I also prefer the yarn base that I use for my own dyed yarn because it again has a slightly tighter, well, it's not a much tighter twist, it has a slightly tighter twist, which keeps it from needing to be, it keeps it from splitting quite as easily. And since I too tend to knit with sharp needles, splitting can be an issue. I don't know what it is about Stroll, but man, does it split on me. So anyway, this has been how I knit. You're not going to necessarily see a whole bunch of new stuff at any point in here. I hope that you found it interesting. I would love to see any videos of you knitting if you happen to have made one. Feel free to link it in the comments. Your comment probably will go to moderation because it'll have a link in it, but when I look at it and see that it's a link to a how I knit video, I will release it and I'll watch your video and check it out. I just think it would be fun to see how everyone knits. Anyway, that was that. I hope you found it interesting. Like I said, leave me a link to any video like this that you have made, and I will see you next week. Bye.